me, Diana, and welcome back to my channel. Today is the day that many of you have been waiting for because today I am continuing my tarot card doll series. If you're new here, then you may not know that I've been doing a series of dolls based on the major arcana and queen cards of the tarot deck. At the end of my last tarot doll, I drew 3 cards for me to pick my next doll from. Out of the 3, I was really drawn towards either the Queen of Cups or the Devil card. But as you already know, I went with the Devil card for our next doll. But why the Devil card? Well, after doing some reading about the Devil card, I was really inspired to create a doll that centers around the topic of mental health. Before I start talking about the Devil card symbology, I wanted to give a warning that for today's doll, I talk about some more serious topics involving mental health. I also wanted to put it out there that later in this video, I incorporate fake blood into my doll's overall look. So if you find either of those things distressing, this video may not be for you. But I really hope that you come back for my next video. So now let's start talking about the Devil card, its symbology, and how it applies to mental health. On the card, we see the classic goat Baphomet form of the devil and a man and woman standing at its feet. In broad terms, the devil represents the darker side of humanity and the things that hold you back from being your best self. These are things like greed, jealousy, addictions, rage, envy, obsessions, and more. The humans on the card have found themselves ensnared within these feelings and have become bound to feelings of short-term pleasures and trapped by the gnawing feelings of depression and anxiety. They are often plagued with the looping, non-stop thoughts that wear away at their feelings of self-worth. As they listen to these lies, they start believing that they have no self-control, and they begin to change from humans into that same kind of dark beast of the devil behind them. For my doll, I'm going to be focusing on just the female on the card and try to capture the hopelessness she feels while being bound to the same negative patterns, thoughts, and path of instant gratifications at the expense of her happiness and health and that of those around her. I did want to add that drawing the Devil card can be scary, but it can actually be a really positive thing because drawing it means that it's time to start addressing your own personal trappings. To err is to be human, and everyone carries around their own darkness, but you don't have to live in that darkness and be consumed by it. It's never too late to confront those repetitive, lying thoughts, to learn how to heal yourself, and to forge a new path of healthy happiness. Alright, my lovelies, that was a whole lot of setup, so enough talking, let's get started on our doll. For today's little devil, we're going to be acting like Dr. Frankenstein because we are going to be mixing 2 dolls into one. I'm starting with the body of Miss Marisol Coxi. She's a descendant of Bigfoot, so with her long legs, her body is the perfect tall and imposing base for our devil doll. Along with the height, she also has furry patches on her arms and legs, which pairs well with the whole bestial devil aesthetic. But for this doll's face, I don't want to use Marisol's. Don't get me wrong, I love her face mold, but there's something soft and enduring about her facial features, and it isn't the right fit for our devious devil. Instead, I'll be using this random head I found in my supply. This head's sharp cheekbones look like they could cut glass, and it somewhat reminds me of Angelina Jolie as Maleficent. As an extra bonus, this head doesn't have any hair plugs, and the smooth scalp will be an excellent base for the horns I plan to sculpt later. So let's get into the prep. It's a little easier today because I don't have to remove any hair plugs. All I have to do is soak the head in hot water and set the head aside for another project once I remove it. Next up, I don't want to use the doll's original face paint, so I'm using a cotton pad soaked in pure acetone to remove the factory face paint. Now we have to deal with the 2 different skin tones, neither of which I want to use as a base color. I'm going to take each piece outside and airbrush them white so I can build up her skin tones the way I want them. Today I'm starting with her face up, and I'm grinding some soft pastels to build up the undertone colors of her face. I want her skin to appear really pale, and I think this blue color will show through the skin, making it appear on the paler side while not completely overwhelming her coloring. So it's going to go to the areas of her face where the skin tends to be the thinnest and shows the veins the most. Now I'm digging up my pale yellow pan pastel color and using it to essentially carve out where the bone is closest to the surface of the skin without any pesky muscle or blood vessels to change how the color looks under the skin. For the areas that look red under the skin, I'm using this candy colored red. I picked this particular shade because I think it pairs nicely with the blue that I used. I'm using this to build up the redness of those areas of the face that get flushed and rosy. She's going to get more blushing later, but this way it looks like a natural part of her skin and not just red sitting on top of it. I've gone ahead and sprayed the soft pastels with Mr. Super Clear Sealant so they don't smudge and lose their vibrancy. And now we're going to work on the last bit of color blocking for under the skin. I'm using a watercolor pencil that's a similar shade to the blue layer that I added in soft pastels, and I'm lightly sketching on soft lines for the appearance of veins. Adding the veins will add a translucency to the skin and will make her skin look extra pale. Now we're going to cover up all the work that we just did using a burnt sienna tint soft pastel. This will push all the color blocking back and make it look like it's sitting under her skin. I sealed the last coat of soft pastels, and now we're going to turn our focus on trying to make the top layer of skin look lifelike. If you've been following me for a while, you know that I like to take watered down acrylic paint and spritz it onto the skin. But if you're new to my channel, I like to do this to add imperfections and color variations to the skin because I don't care what Facetune says, everyone's skin is unique and it's the little imperfections that give us character. And character is beautiful. Now to shade and highlight the areas of her face to define her bone structure. After all, she is a three-dimensional person and deserves some nice contouring to add depth to her face. I'm starting to block in the areas of her eyes, making sure to pay attention to where her eye sockets are so I can make it look like her eyes are naturally sitting in that space and aren't just flat circles sitting there. Next, we want to start applying her eye makeup. And today I'm going to be blending out pinks and reds from her eyes all the way to her temples. I've heard this called fairy makeup before, and I think this soft but daring look works well with her being a supernatural creature. As I keep working on her face up, I'm going to keep adding darker pastels and blending it out into her temples. Jumping to her eyes, you've probably noticed that she has green scleras instead of white, and that's because I'm going for an animalistic look for her eyes. I picked green, like green eyes of envy, to go with the unpleasant lingering thoughts associated with the devil card. I'm adding stripes of reds and oranges to build up that animal look. For her pupils, I'm continuing that pan devil theme and giving her horizontal pupils like that of a goat. And if you're wondering why her face is shiny all of a sudden, I had a little mishap and used glossy Mr. Super Clear instead of the normal flat that I use. I actually like how it looks in person, but I don't think it films as well, so my apologies. There was some loud swearing on my end when I realized my mistake. To make her eyelashes stand out, I'm using a really thin bristle paintbrush and adding white lines to the lashes. Eyelashes have a natural sheen to them, so the white will make it look like her lashes are reflecting light, and that will make them look fuller. Now we're going to give her a simple lip look. First, I'm contouring the sides of her lips to make them look fuller and poutier, and then I'm going to give them soft lines to create the creases and highlights of the lips. From her face up, we're going to move upward and sculpt some devil horns for her. I'm going to be using my newest crafting favorite, foam clay, for this, and I'm going to be dyeing it with some burnt sienna acrylic paint so that the color matches the base skin tone that I used for her skin. I've wrapped her head in plastic wrap to protect all of my hard work, and I've given her a little cap of clay to build the horns off of. I'll be cutting the horns off of the cap later, but this will give the clay a surface to stick to while I work. For the shape of the horns, I'm going with straight up and slightly curved in, a classic devilish shape. I must admit that while I'm shaping them, they are kind of giving me derpish Kill the Wabbit Valkyrie vibes, but I'm hoping that as I keep going, I will get the evil ram feel that I want. The horns represent the loss of humanity while one's shadow primal self takes over, so I want it to look like real bone and flesh instead of campy devil horns. I let the clay dry and firm up overnight, and now we want to start layering on clay so they start looking like real horns. I've added these snakes of clay to help me start building up ridges that will go up the horn. Her horns are inspired by the blocky formations that a lot of ram's horns have, and I'm pinching the clay around the horns to give them a strong kind of spiky look. To make the horns look like they're growing out of her head, I have to use the same colors and techniques that I used for her skin in the face-up. I want the horns to look like they're transitioning from flesh to bone to represent the gradual way that one's despair and darkness can change how they present themselves to the world. As you just saw, I did some basic contouring of the ridges of the horns using soft pastels, but now I want to really define them so they read as built-up bone. Now I'm starting to add color to the tips of the horns. I'm dry brushing the same color I used for the lines of the horns so that it softly blends out to about midway down. I'll later use straight black to darken the color even more. I'm going to be using a lot of red in her outfit, so I'm just adding a touch of red to the horns so they don't look out of place with the rest of her look later on. Going back to the bottoms of the horns, I'm adding just a bit of highlight above the ridges, and once everything's dry, I'm going to add pastels to soften the lines just a bit. Now I'm going to be zhuzhing up the horns by using one of these paints to give them a pretty shimmer. I have two colors to pick from, either this full spectrum color on the left or this blue-violet to the right. I don't know which one I'm going to like more, so I've prepped some clay to do some swatches. The swatches have dried, and first we have the full spectrum paint, which is a glossy, glittery look. Next, it's the blue-violet, which is more on the holographic side. I like them both, but I think for this project, the holographic paint is exactly what I'm looking for. Now that the final coat of paint has dried, we're ready to remove the horn cap and trim off the excess clay. So before I add the horns, I'm going to pause and think about what I want to do about her hair. I had fully planned on giving her some hair out of yarn wefts, but the more I look at her, the more I'm really liking how she looks bald. While I was planning out my doll, I was really inspired by the model/designer Hannah Rose Dalton. Her makeup and clothes are outer-worldly and subhuman, and she's often bald for these looks. She's also one of the few people that can pull off having no eyebrows, which is where my doll's no eyebrow look comes from. The only issue of leaving her bald is that the head that I'm using has a hole and a ring carved into the top of the head, so I need to figure out how to incorporate that into my devil's design. The hole is easy, I'm just going to plug it up with a bit of my foam clay, but figuring out what to do with the ring is going to be an interesting challenge. After doing some brainstorming, I started thinking about what if the circle is a brand burned into her mind, a mark that represents the trauma that she carries around with her. It's not uncommon for people who have gone through hardships or troubling times to feel like they've been spiritually marked by the experience. But in this case, we're going to add an actual visual marking of that. With pastels, I've made her skin look like it's been branded, and on top, I'm sketching on the symbol of the Capricorn zodiac sign. The devil card is associated with the Capricorn sign, so it's almost like the devil on the card has branded her with his own name, claiming her body and mind. The devil card speaks of how hopeless and out of control one can feel, how you can feel totally lost to that dark side. But when you pull the card, it reminds us that you don't have to let it take over. You can take ownership of yourself again and become who you are meant to be. If you're struggling with these feelings, know that you are important and deserve to be happy. If you're ready to start looking for help, I've added a link in the description that has a lot of different sorts of resources for you to look at. Okay, I've sealed in the pastels and the paint for the branding, and now we can go ahead and attach her horns. I'm using hot glue to attach them so I can position them just right. I'm using the hot glue to fill in the gaps between the horns and her head, but of course, seeing all that hot glue doesn't look good, so I'm going to have to cover up the seams. Fortunately, I still have some flesh tone clay, so I'm just going to cover up the seams with little bits of it. Once the clay has dried, it really stands out against the rest of her head, so we are once again going to come in with the soft pastels to shade and contour the little bumps. And we're going to bring in some more holographic paint so it looks like a cohesive part of the horns. We are almost done with her head, but I just want to add a touch of Sculpey gloss to her eyes and lips to make the whole look complete. I'm going to be giving her body a unique paint job, but we still need to prep the base of her skin by following the same techniques that we used for her face-up. You always want to use the same colors used on the face on the body to make the whole doll look uniform and cohesive. So, like I said in the beginning of this video, this doll's theme is on the darker side. For her body, I was inspired by the devilish designs by fashion designer Hu Shengwing. I was particularly drawn to his 2016 collection where he had models walk the runway while smeared in paint that looks like blood. The devil card represents violence, so I'm using the blood to represent the pain and harm that you can do to yourself and others once you go down that self-destructive path. I'm using some really watered down acrylic paint and using my finger to blend it out. I'm doing it this way so that it doesn't look like it was brushed on, and it looks like it was smeared on by hand. My hope is that by doing it this way, it looks more like real blood instead of just applied paint. The paint is dry, so I'm going to be doing something a little bit odd, and I'm going to be covering her hands in red glitter. Another part of the devil card represents obsessive attachments, intense passions, and greed, so I'm using glitter to represent her greedily grasping for anything she can get her hands on. And to add on to her opulence, I'm adding a few rhinestones to really make her greed sparkle. I have one last element to add to her body, and that's going to be sculpting her a devil's tail. I'm taking some thin wire and wrapping it in that same skin tone clay. This way I can bend and shape it so that you can see it from the front. And I just have to give it the classic spade shape at the end of the tail, which I'm just sculpting out of a little blob of clay. Off screen, I painted the whole tail red using acrylic paint, and now I want to give the tail a little dingy and drab feel, so I'm applying a little bit of black pastels here and there. I don't want it to look too drab, so again, I'm applying more of that holographic paint to give it a fun sheen and to tie the horns and the tail together so she has a nicely unified look. The woman on the Devil's card has a tail that ends with a bushel of fruit. This represents addiction to pleasures. Instead of adding fruit to the tail, I'm using my friend glitter again to represent that desire. The glitter also gives a nod to the classic devil Halloween costume, and as you'll see later, all the elements I added to the tail will go very nicely with her outfit. Let's talk about her outfit. Today, I'm going to be creating a high-low skirt with leggings and a bodice. I was inspired again by Huishin Wing with this outfit, but I'm going to be giving it some unique touches of my own, starting with the bodice. I'm planning on making her bodice out of overlapping red thread. I want it to look like it's constructed out of very thin veins, and for it to look delicate but forceful, like a raw nerve. So to create this look, I've taken my mannequin Marisol doll and wrapped her in plastic wrap and tape. To protect her from the glue, I'm going to cover her whole torso in. I don't have an exact plan for how I'm going to apply the thread, so I'm just going to add it thread by thread and follow the curvature of her body. I'm going to add more thread off camera, but we'll come back to it once it's dried. Now it's time to talk about my newbie sewing skills for those of you who are invested in my sewing learning journey. For this project, I'm making pants for the very first time. I made a little trial pair and they turned out pretty good for my first time. Sure, I sewed some of the panels on backwards, but they actually act as pants. I've started to work with my actual fabric, and I'm a lot more confident that this pair will work like pants too, and have all the panels going in the right direction. And I was right! The pants are in fact pantsing. Now I just have to turn them out, which I have to say is turning out to be one of my least favorite things about sewing. I'm always scared I'm going to bust a seam because of how small everything is. For her high-low skirt, I used this shiny red fabric to go with her tail, and I lined the bottom with the same fabric that I used for her pants. The bodice has completely dried, so I'm going to cut a slit up the back so I can remove it from the mannequin and take off the plastic and tape before we add it to our doll. The dried glue gives the bodice an appearance of a shiny membrane holding the thread veins together, which is creepy and perfect. Before we can add the tail, I'm first going to put her pants on so I can make sure that the tail sits exactly where I want it to. It's a little bit easier said than done because the pants are having a hard time slipping over her furry ankles and booty, but that's not surprising since Marisol is larger than the typical Monster High doll. Which also caused a fit problem for me when it came to the waistband of the skirt. So I have to cover up a little bit of ugliness with these two beads, because while my sewing skills are improving, I still have a lot to learn. For her shoes, I'm going to be using the shoes that came with my Marisol doll because she has extra large Sasquatch feet. To prep them for their transformation, I'm taking these two little goat toys and beheading them. Sorry, goat friends. Their heads are now going to be hot glued to the shoes as the first part of their redesign. The shoes are going to be getting the same kind of treatments that the tail did, starting with shading the upper portion with black. Next up is the holographic paint, which kind of makes the shoes look bloody, so pretty accurate when it comes to wearing high heels. And last but not least, the heel portion is getting the glitter treatment. There's no special meaning behind the glitter this time. I'm just tying the hands, tail, and shoes together, and I think it's cute. For the final touch to her outfit, I'm going to be adding this teeny tiny barbed wire. The people on the devil card are wrapped in chains, which symbolizes the enslavement they have to their vices and dark behaviors. I wasn't able to find tiny chains, but I think this little barbed wire is the perfect way to symbolize this feeling of oppression and imprisonment. Now it's time to attach the head to the body, and then we can go take a final look at our devil doll. Now let's take a final look at our finished devil card doll. Be sure you keep watching until the end of this video, because I'll be drawing 3 more cards and making my next tarot doll based off of one of those 3. And if you haven't already done so, be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button to get notifications the next time I post a video. I post every month, and you aren't going to want to miss out on my next doll. Okay, I'm just gonna shuffle those other 2 cards back into the deck before I draw my next 3 cards. First, we have Justice. Next is the Chariot. And last is the Star card. All 3 are really strong cards, so let me know which one you would choose. Be sure to let me know which doll you want me to do next, and I'll see you next time with another doll repaint video. Bye!